Hi, guys. Uh, this is Scott from Idea Grove and TrustSignals.com. And, I've got a book coming out, my very first. Soon we're in the final stuff you got to do before you put out a book and print it and all that. But I'm getting a little impatient. So I thought I would just read some of it to you because, it's on paper here and I got a microphone and so we don't have to wait for anything to be printed or anything like that. I can just read it, and then you can hopefully uh, tell me you like it. Or maybe if you don't, you can tell me what you don't like about it, give me some feedback. Because, when you're writing a book, as you're kind of in this vacuum, you're off by yourself and doing your research and thinking and writing and sharing it provides such oxygen. It's so great, scary sometimes, but also mostly great to just hear what people think about your ideas and what you have to say. So I just thought I would start from time to time reading some excerpts from the book. I'm going to start today by reading from the introduction of Trust Signals. The full title of the book is Trust Signals Brand Building in a Post-Truth World, and the title of the introduction is The Dirty Little Secret About PR. I think reading it is probably I think it times out at about 18 minutes. So settle in, enjoy. I wish I were a professional reader of audiobooks, but I will do my best. At least there'll be the authenticity that I'm the person who wrote the words. So I'll try to do a good job. I can't promise there won't be a little coughing or a little, hopefully no other bodily sounds besides coughing along the way. But I'll do my best. So, Trust Signals, Brand Building in a Post-Truth World. Introduction, The Dirty Little Secret About PR. As a longtime PR guy, I'd like to start by speaking to others in my profession, because while Trust Signals provides practical advice for all marketers and business owners, I wrote this book specifically to advance the field of public relations. The Public Relations Society of America, PRSA, defines PR as a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. In common practice, however, the definition of PR is much narrower than that. Simply put, the job of most PR professionals has been to help brands procure media coverage and to influence the tone of that coverage, to place positive stories in the media. PR professionals have understood this definition to be a limiting one for years, but still haven't managed to come up with anything better. I've heard many well-meaning PR people attempt to refute this reality, twisting themselves into rhetorical pretzels in the process. But the fact remains that to the majority of brand executives, particularly at mid-sized companies and smaller, PR is media relations. Nothing more, nothing less. The rest of what most integrated PR agencies do today is better known to clients by a different term, marketing. Which of course raises the question, what's the difference between PR and marketing anyway? And does it even matter? I would argue there is a difference, and it does matter. Because if a PR practitioner or PR firm doesn't know that they are uniquely suited, what they are uniquely suited to do relative to marketers, or why they exist relative to marketing agencies, there's no point in having a profession that calls itself PR in the first place, is there? Without a clear definition and purpose, every PR person is a marketing person, and every PR agency is a marketing agency. And the only distinction in the minds of clients is that the marketing agency that calls itself a PR firm is probably a little better at media relations and a little worse at everything else. Many business executives today would describe PR as subordinate to marketing, a tool in the marketer's toolkit. In the same way that the majority of execs view PR's primary role as media relations, most also see PR as just another arrow in the marketing quiver. No different from SEO or display advertising or media buying. That's not how public relations professionals have traditionally viewed themselves, however. Historically, PR practitioners have regarded PR as not merely a tool of marketing, but the equal of marketing as a strategic discipline and management function. Public relations, its proponents have argued, is the rightful keeper of corporate identity and brand reputation. The PR function, in fact, should lead overall brand communications, not only to customers, but to investors, employees, partners, community activists, and the public at large. As a writer for PRSA's PRSA blog put it, marketing addresses consumers of a product or service. Public relations is the strategic function that addresses all of an organization's key constituencies. That's a much more ambitious vision than chasing down reporters for media coverage, isn't it? So what happened? Why does the marketing department control the brand and budget for the vast majority of businesses? Why does the organization's PR leader typically report to the CMO or vice president of marketing, when in the past it was more common to report directly to the CEO? And when, according to industry surveys, more than 70% of PR leaders still say they should report to the CEO. Why isn't the PR function entrusted with responsibility for building, growing, and protecting the corporate brand? The answer is that PR practitioners have diminished their own profession, mostly by sins of omission. They haven't kept up with the times, redefined their role, or expanded their relevance in the face of change. To understand how PR got here, let's take a look back at the history of public relations in the United States. In the first half of the 20th century, PR was faced with two fundamentally different paths to follow. These approaches were championed by two men who have been called the fathers of PR, Edward Bernays and Ivy Lee. Lee was a former journalist who took a straightforward approach to helping his clients by building relationships with the media. Bernays, whose uncle was Sigmund Freud, the founder of psychoanalysis, had more ambitious goals for public relations. He wanted to elevate it to the status of a true profession, like law or medicine, built on the science of understanding what makes people tick. Lee's most famous contribution to the profession was his Declaration of Principles, in which he promised journalists that his goal was to provide them with accurate information and not to manipulate the facts to his clients' advantage. Lee's declaration proclaimed, "We aim to supply news. This is not an advertising agency. Further details on any subject treated will be supplied promptly, and any editor will be assisted most carefully in verifying directly any statement of fact." Bernays, on the other hand, took pride in using audience research and social psychology to influence behavior. He called it engineering consent and considered it critical to democracy, having served with the U.S. Committee on Public Information to build support for American participation in World War I. As he explained in his 1928 book, Propaganda, modern business must have its finger continuously on the public pulse. The voice of the people expresses the mind of the people, composed of inherited prejudices and symbols and cliches and verbal formulas. Bernays aimed for PR practitioners to become experts in understanding these prejudices and symbols and cliches and verbal formulas to better connect with the audiences they sought to influence. The PR industry ultimately took the simpler, less controversial path of Lee, led by organizations such as the PRSA, which was founded in 1947 and remains the industry's top professional association. By and large, PR practitioners have tethered their fate and their value as professionals to the news media ever since. The emergence and explosive growth of U.S. mass media following World War II led to a parallel boom in PR. The future of PR seemed assured, so long as the mainstream news media continued to dominate the public consciousness, serving as gatekeepers of brand awareness and arbiters for brand trust. Unfortunately, as traditional media have fragmented and lost influence over time, public relations has struggled along with it. Facts are facts, as old school journalists like to say, and the facts are these. In 2008, There were 115,000 total newsroom employees, reporters, editors, photographers, and videographers across newspapers, TV, radio, and online publishers. By 2020, according to a 2021 Pew Research Center analysis, that number had dropped to 85,000, a loss of 30,000 jobs. That's a 26% decline in a little more than a decade. It's basic economics. In inflation-adjusted dollars, ad revenues for the news media have been in a constant state of decline for 40 years. That means fewer journalists are around to cover stories, which in turn means PR professionals have to work harder and spend more time than ever to get their attention. And when coverage is achieved, it typically attracts fewer readers and viewers and wields less influence than before, the product of splintered audiences and scattered information sources. It's a vicious cycle. The question that really troubles me, and that should be of concern to everyone in the public relations business, is this. When you start extending the definition of PR beyond media relations, what is truly unique to PR? If you look closely at the way many public relations firms describe themselves today, it's like you're staring at the hole in a donut. Some global agencies make a big deal of calling themselves progressive PR firms, or they portray themselves as integrated agencies that are earned first, referring to earning media exposure through PR rather than buying it through ads. But these definitions fail to resonate. They don't meaningfully differentiate between what is PR and what isn't, and they don't explain why clients should care about the distinction. So, where do PR practitioners go from here? Suffice it to say that PR cannot remain so tightly anchored to the news media. That's why I would argue that the profession should look to the inspiration, not to the ideas of Lee, but to those of Bernays. The Bernays path, one focus less on the how of tactics and more on the why of strategy, is the better one for PR's future. I'm not suggesting diving into some of the darker arts of psychological manipulation advocated by Bernays. His legacy is far from untarnished. But I do believe PR professionals should take a step back from media relations to ask themselves this question. What is the business goal of media coverage? Achieving this business goal, after all, is what's most important to brands. It's certainly what matters to the clients of PR agencies like mine. What, then, is the business goal of media coverage? Most PR clients would tell you it's visibility, but that's only what they think they want. I would argue that it's not what they actually want. If PR clients simply wanted visibility, if they just wanted to raise brand awareness, it would be more cost-effective for them to buy ads to follow their target audiences around wherever they went online, wouldn't it? Of course it would. What PR clients are really seeking is credibility. They are seeking authority. They are seeking third-party validation. Ultimately, they are seeking one thing above all else: trust. Brands need to be trusted in the marketplace or they won't be able to grow. Traditionally, PR firms have leveraged third-party validation from the news media to earn trust for their clients. But media coverage alone isn't enough anymore. In fact, it's far from enough. Today's brands must gain trust in other ways. A new definition for PR: securing trust at scale. Now let's go back to that PRSA definition of public relations I mentioned at the outset of this chapter, because it needs another look. I want to make clear that I'm a longtime member and advocate of the PRSA. I have spoken at its events, attended its conferences, judged its competitions, and held its accredited in public relations APR credential for more than 2 decades. I also respect the process PRSA periodically undertakes to refresh its official definition of PR. Most recently, in 2011, the organization reached out to its 30,000 members in more than 100 chapters nationwide, soliciting ideas and feedback for an updated definition. PR pros submitted more than 900 proposed definitions, and 1,500 practitioners voted on one of the 3 finalists. Since March 2012, the official definition of PR has been this: public relations is a strategic communications process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. I like that the definition is a broad one because it encourages PR people to think beyond media relations. I also like that it doesn't subordinate the PR function to marketing because PR's concerns must extend beyond the product or customer. What I don't like is that it doesn't include an overarching objective. PR clients want to achieve outcomes to build, grow, and protect their brands. No CEO or CMO has ever asked my agency to help build mutually beneficial relationships. That's a means, but to what end? The other thing I don't like is that it focuses on the communication process rather than all the things that lead up to it. PR should drive how a brand behaves, not just how it communicates. So I've developed a new definition of PR that focuses on the strategy and outcome of our work. It's short and to the point. PR is the art of securing trust at scale. While that's a very specific objective, it opens up limitless possibilities for PR professionals to help brands achieve that goal. If we accept this definition as a more useful one for public relations, then it follows that PR practitioners should consider their chief role to be as experts in and advocates for trust, to be the keepers of trust for brands. Based on the profession's history and experience, PR people are well suited to this role. And I would argue that it certainly lifts PR to the status of strategic discipline and management function. So, how should PR practitioners assert themselves in this role as the keepers of trust? In the same way that marketers create buyer personas, PR practitioners should create trust profiles for their clients' target audiences to better understand the prejudices, symbols, cliches, and verbal formulas that influence trust. Based on these profiles, PR pros should then master and deploy an evolving set of practices, which in this book I describe as trust signals, to secure audience trust. Trust signals is all about the tools and tactics that businesses can use to build, grow, and protect their brands. And while marketers and business owners can deploy the practices outlined in this book, my belief is that this work is uniquely suited to PR practitioners who have always focused on earning credibility rather than selling products. PR firms and corporate communications departments don't need to be all things to all people. They simply must become better than any other type of agency or function at understanding what makes buyers and other audiences trust. If PR leaders truly want to elevate their profession, if they want to guide corporate identity, lead brand strategy, and report to the CEO again, that's the path for doing it. This book will show you how. So that's the introduction. I hope you liked it. I will do chapter 1, I guess, next. And there's, I don't know, should I know how many chapters there are? There's 15 or 16. And periodically over time, as we run up to the release of the book, I'll share these excerpts. Gosh, like I said, feedback is like oxygen to me for something that's been such a long project. So welcome yours, and thank you for listening.